back to another exciting episode here at IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Wes Bryant, and in today's episode, we're coming back at you with more VMware. That's right, the VMware Certified Professional version 6. Joining me back in the studios today is none other than Mr. Don Pezet. Don, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Wes. Ready to dive right back into the world of VMware. And in this episode, we're going to be tackling multi-site libraries. And I know libraries are something we covered really briefly in an earlier episode. You'll find as you work with vSphere and vCenter and ESXi and all these products that you start to acquire, let's call them artifacts, right? Things, ISO images for doing installs, templates for virtual machines, or OVFs that you're importing, virtual appliances. You might have other types of files like that you build up over time. And sometimes we store them on our own laptops or on the server that we're working with at that time, but they're easy to lose. And there's always that time down the road where I'm like, boy, I really wish I still had that virtual appliance that I could just throw out here. And what did I do with it? Let me go find it and download it again. It's nice to have a place to stuff all this junk. And I shouldn't call it junk, it is useful stuff. It'd be nice to have a place to put it. And so in an earlier episode, just real briefly, I showed creating a library. And a library is a great place to store stuff like that. Not stuff that's going to run live. If I want things to run live, I put that in a data store, right? So my virtual machine disks, my VMDKs, and the virtual machine configuration files, those go into a data store. But templates, ISO images, OVF files, those virtual appliances, those things, I'm not going to run them live. I might take them and attach them to a live machine or import them into a live machine, but I'm not going to run live from the library. And so libraries will typically exist in data stores that are on cheaper storage, less expensive stuff that's not like fully redundant, things that are not backed up as often because we don't go to them very often and they don't change very often. And so we can create a library and we can put our stuff there. And so we did see that in an earlier episode. I'll do it again here in a minute, but it is a great place to just kind of stuff that stuff away and have it available.
Don, when it comes to content libraries, is it a single library or do we have different flavors, if you will?
So as far as the number of libraries, you can have as many as you want. Typically, you only need one. But what I think you're getting at is if I have a single library, where's that available? It's just available to my vSphere deployment. With libraries, there really is just one type of library. It's a local library, a library that's available just to your deployment. But the title of this episode is multi-site library. So what are we talking about there? And that is, I might have more than one vSphere deployment. And if I create a local library in one vSphere environment, it's not visible in the other one. They can't see it. And so what we can do is we can take one of our libraries and we can do what's called publishing it. We can make it available externally. And then we can go to any other vSphere deployment that we have and we can subscribe it. We can connect to that library in the other environment and create a duplicate. And that way, I have technically a local library in one vSphere deployment and a local library in the other vSphere deployment. They're still local libraries, but they're linked externally and synchronizing data. So now it's a multi-site local library, which is kind of a contradiction in terms, but that's the way that it works. So we can create one or more libraries through our normal means, and then you can easily make them available external after the fact, or you can do it at the time of creation. It's really up to you how you want to go about that. Right. So just as an example, let's run through doing a local library first, and then we'll go all multi-site, and you'll see it's not that bad. So I'm going to take my vSphere deployment here, and I'm logged into vCenter. And inside of vCenter, you kind of look down the left side here, you'll see your storage and networking, VMs and templates, clusters. You'll see all the different things that you've got, right? And if I go down here into storage, I'm going to see my data stores, right? So these are all data stores that are right here. And that's all that I can create, because here we're talking about live data, data that we're using for virtual machines. If I right-click on my data center here and I go down to storage, it gives me the option to create new data stores, but not to create new libraries, all right? I can create a virtual app from a library, or I can create a virtual machine from a library. I can use the libraries, but I can't create them here, all right? The libraries themselves are actually created back under our inventories. And so if I go back to my home page here and we take a look at vCenter inventory lists, we can go in there to create our libraries. Or what I normally do is inventories is laid out right here on the home page. They have a nice big button right here that says content libraries. So it's not in the left side menu, but it is available right here on the home page. So I'm going to go into content libraries, and I don't have any. I know we created one in an episode earlier. I must have deleted it or rolled that snapshot back or something. So I don't have one right now. I'm going to create one. Maybe I want a place to be able to store all of my ISO images and make it complete across all my different vSphere deployments. Or I want my templates to be here, right? I might have a vSphere environment for production and a vSphere environment for dev and testing. And so the dev team is working on stuff in this dev environment. And when they're done, they build the virtual machines, everything's set the way they want. How do I get it in production? Well, maybe I want to set up a library where they can move those virtual machines into the library. It'll synchronize to production, and then I can just create vApps or virtual machines right out of that library, right? It's a great way to move things between those two separate environments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to whip up a new content library, and if I just scroll down here, I'll see create new content library, which makes life easy. So I'm going to do that, and it's just going to ask me for a name. And so maybe I'll call this my, maybe this is the dev team library. Okay, so the dev team, as they work on stuff, they're going to stick it here. I'm going to synchronize this to production, and in production I can grab things from here and deploy it live, right? So this is how we'll ship that data between the two vSphere environments. So I'll just call this my dev team library. It's going to ask me for a vCenter server to attach it to. I've only got one. If you have more than one vCenter server, you'll attach it to a particular one. So I'm going to stick with mine and move forward. And now it's going to ask me to configure the library. Now the default is local content library, okay? If I do that, it's going to create a standard library, and that's what I would have done in the earlier show if you saw it then. So just creating a local library, it's going to be visible to this vCenter server and this vSphere deployment, and that's it. Any other environments I have won't see it. But notice my next option, publish content library externally. If we do that, we can make the library available externally, and now other people can connect to it. What it does is it effectively generates a URL, an address that will be tied to this library. Now I'm going to leave that off for now because we can turn it on after the fact too. So I'm just going to create a regular old local content library. All right, then I need to add some storage. It's got to go somewhere. And I could choose to tuck it into a NFS URL. So if I had a network file system share somewhere, I could tie to that. Or I could select an existing data store and pop it in there. So if I've got a shared data store or something in place, then I could certainly use that. Doesn't look like I have any shared ones laying around, so I'll just stick it here on one of my servers. So I'm going to pop it there, and I'll hit next, and we'll finish that up. All right. So now that I've finished that, as soon as that task finishes, I'll see my dev team library, and it's ready to have stuff put into it. Okay. Now when you view it by default, it's going to show you templates. It expects us to have templates in the library. That's the most common use for it. But notice you've got this other types button where you can see other data that might be in the library. So this is basically where we can start to see that, and you've got a little button right here that lets you import an OVF package to the library. So if you've got an OVF laying around, you can import it right here into the library, or we can move things into the library too. You have a few different ways that you can go about that. All right. So, so let's say for me that I want to import an OVF into this thing. I can just hit the little import button, and I can pull it from a URL if I've got an address. I can pull it from a local file on my own computer if I've got one laying around, and I can bring it in that way too. And then you'll see here where I've got the item name and the library that I can pick from. So the OVF can come from different places. Now, maybe you've got one that's already in a data store somewhere, right? I do have an ISO data store set up. If I go back to my home page and go to storage, I've got this shared ISO data store laying around, and inside of it, it's got a bunch of stuff, right? So if I jump in here and take a look, I've got a bunch of ISOs in here, and if I go into my vSphere 6 folder, I should see that I've got an OVF in here somewhere. Here we go. I've got the VMware Hybrid Cloud Manager. That's an OVF, right? It's an appliance that I can import, and it's got the Hybrid Cloud Manager on it. So it's already in a data center, or a data store, and I can use that to my heart's content, but what I'm going to be missing here is I don't have a way to replicate that data store. So I can't replicate that to an external system. The data store is right here in my vSphere deployment. But if you right-click on that, you'll see where you can move or copy it. And I can copy that data. And when I go to copy it, I'm going to see the other data stores that are out there, right? And when I do that, notice how I don't see the library? Libraries don't show up in the data store. Well, this is actually just showing true data stores. I could pick that host01 local data store to send it there. And inside of that data store, see how I've got a content library? So you actually see the content library. There's that content library I made, and I could send the data in there right from a data store. But that's not normally what we're doing. Normally we're sending templates in or whatever, and we're doing it either from a URL or from a local file. So the other way that I go about that would just be to go back to my content libraries, choose that dev team library, and now when I go to import that template with the import button, I can just hit local file and browse, and I can browse and find it on my own machine. Now, when I go to do that, it's going to tell me I need the VMware Client Integration plugin installed. I don't have that installed. If I were in the vSphere native client, I wouldn't have that problem. I'm actually on a Mac, so that plugin's not going to work out so well for me. If you download it, actually, you know what? We can give it a shot here. It's got the Mac one. They do have a Mac plugin, so it's going to load that, and as soon as that's done, I'll be able to install it and upload a file into here. Now, while we're waiting on that, though, there's some other things that we can do. For example, let's say I do want to make this available externally. So the dev team starts putting their templates in here. So every time they build up a new virtual machine, they get it set up just right, they create a template, and then they throw it right in here. Okay? I want that to synchronize over to my other environment, so I need to publish this externally. If you pull up the settings on your content library, so I'm just going to right-click on Dev Team Library and go to Edit Settings. When we go to Edit Settings, you'll see right here where we can publish it externally. And when you check it, it's a little different than the screen earlier. When I checked it, it was just a checkbox there. But here, when I check it, it gives me the URL. Here's the fully qualified URL to this library. And so I can copy that link, and I can take that to another vSphere deployment on my network, and on there I can add a library and choose to subscribe to a URL, and I would provide that URL right there. Sorry, if I can keep my screen under control. So I'd provide that URL, and I'd be in business. Now, if you do that, technically anybody who has the URL could connect to that library, and I may not want that. If this is like an internet address, which it shouldn't be, right? This should just be local only. But if it were on the internet, anybody could get to it and start pulling data out of there like my templates, and I probably don't want that. So we can choose to turn on authentication. And if we turn on authentication, you just provide a password, right? So I'm going to provide a password for mine. Let me make sure I do it something that I can remember. And now, if somebody wants to connect to the library, they just have to provide a password. It's not like a username and password. It's not Kerberos. It's not like super crazy. It's more like CHAP, right? It's a really basic authentication, but at least it'll stop just random people from connecting to the content library, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Now, when that's done, the dev team library doesn't look much different. It does have a little blue arrow on its icon letting me know that it is available externally. But otherwise, I continue to use it exactly the same way that I've been using it. I throw templates in there, and I work with it. No real difference, right? If I need to verify that URL, I can go to the Manage tab, and I get it right there. I can see it, and I get my summary of data. So this thing is up. It's going. It's doing its thing. All right, well, of course, I don't have the plugin installed on my machine, so I'm going to cheat and just jump over to another machine that does happen to have the plugin installed. That'll be a little faster. So I'm going to come over here to this machine. I'll just jump back into my content libraries and my dev team library, and we'll jump in to take a look at our stuff. And I'm just going to go to import a template, and instead of going to a URL, I'm going to go to a local file. And when you have the plugin, then you can browse and you can pull files right off of your local file system. So I'm just going to grab that OVF. Now, notice how it is just showing OVF files. That's the default. So I see that hybrid cloud manager. I've got other files in there, though. So for example, if I were to change that to say all files, now all my other stuff shows up. So if I want to throw other things in there, I certainly can. Maybe I want to have a copy of the Power CLI. All right, so I want to throw the Power CLI in there. I can do that, and now it'll be available in there. I can't really use it, right? I can't run the Power CLI from inside of the library, but I can download it and run it on my own machine if I wanted. So I'm going to load the hybrid cloud manager in there, that OVF that I've got. And so it's going to bring that in. It's going to populate it with a name right there. I'll leave that be and just hit OK. And it's going to start bringing that one in. Okay, so it's going to import that one in the background. The file will show up immediately, so I immediately see VM Hybrid Cloud Manager. But over here, I'll see stored content locally is set to no. If it's not stored locally, where is it stored? Well, nowhere. It's uploading, right? So it's going to show that way while it's uploading until it's done. And once it's done, then these values will populate and it'll show it. Now that file is about 1.5 gigs in size, so that's going to take a minute. While we wait on that, I'm going to go to the Other Types tab. The Other Types tab, that's where we see everything that's not an OVF. And if you float over the Import button, you'll see a little tooltip that says Import ISO images or other file types. You can put whatever you want in here, not just templates, even though templates are the main design for what this is supposed to be used for. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that little import, and I'll do another local file. And this time when I browse, see how other stuff shows up? And so I can see some of these ISO images. It's actually defaulting just to ISOs, and we can change that to all files and put pretty much anything in there. So if I want to put a copy of the Power CLI in, I can. So I'll go ahead and choose that, and I'm going to throw the Power CLI in there. Now that's an executable file. I definitely can't use an executable file from inside of here because it only runs on Windows machines. It's not going to run on an ESXi host, right? But it'll upload it, it'll have it there. And then from my own machine, if I ever want, I can come over here and I can choose that file. And under Actions, you'll see export the item, clone the item, right? I can actually choose to export it and send it somewhere else, or even download it and run it from my own machine. That'll show up as soon as the upload is done. It'll have it where I can download it to my own machine. There'll be a little folder with the arrow pointing the other direction. So now I can go to any computer, log into the vSphere client, go into this library, and then download the Power CLI, load it, and have it going. I've kind of created my own repository of files. All right, so those are uploading in the background, and we can watch those in our tasks, or I'll just let it run. But once they're uploaded, then they're ready to use. Now, what if I've got more than one location I want them to have access to these files? So I said, like, if this is my dev environment, and I want access to these things in my production environment too. Well, now I can go to my production environment, and I can subscribe to this. This library has a URL, right? So if I go back to my Manage tab, I can see the URL right here. And I'm just going to copy that link, right? So I'm copying that link into my clipboard. We put a password on it, right? So I need to remember what that password is, which hopefully I do. And now I can go to my other vSphere deployment. And on my other vSphere deployment, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new content library. So I'm going to go here to Content Libraries, and I'll go to Create a New Content Library. And when we create the new content library on the other system, we have to give it a name. And so, you know, I might call this my dev library. I'm going to call it my production library, since I'm over on my production server now, but you can call it whatever. And the important part is on the next page. Instead of saying I want a local library, I'm going to say that I'm subscribing to a library. And I'm going to plug in the URL that points to that library. So now it's going to subscribe. These don't have to be the same vSphere deployments. These can be completely separate. For me, it's production versus dev, and I'm linking them together right here. Now, when we do that, I've got to provide a password. So I've got a little check mark here that says Enable Authentication, and I can punch in the password that we set for the library. If you don't have a password, you don't need it. And then next is a really important choice. Download all library content immediately, or download library content only when needed. Okay. If I leave it at the default, download all content immediately, it's going to connect up to the other library, and it's going to copy everything from that library right here. And then whenever changes are seen, it'll get those and copy them down too. If it's a really big library, let's say it's a terabyte of stuff, tons of templates, I don't actually need them. I just want them to be available, right? If I do this, it's going to download all of them. So another option I've got is to download content only when needed. Now I can go into the library, and if I go to use a template from the library, it'll download it at that time. So if I have 100 templates and I only use 5 of them, the other 95 show up, but it never downloads them. It's a great way to save space. But it hurts you time-wise. If there's ever an emergency, like, oh, I need to roll out this VM, I need that template right now, oh, I've got to wait for it to download, right? So that's kind of what we're choosing here is fast deployment, we download everything. But efficient space and storage utilization, we choose to download it as needed. Okay? And you can kind of do a mixture. I'm going to choose download library content only when needed, and I'll show you in a moment. We can actually go and pick physical files and say synchronize it right now. All right, so we can kind of get an in-between. But here in the wizard, you just see the two separate items. Download it all now, or download it at the time that I use it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit next on that. Now it's going to ask where am I going to put this thing. And so I need to pick a data store to stick it in. I'll put it in my host 02 data store. And I'll move forward on that, and we can finish it up. Now, normally this would be in 2 different environments. Technically, I just did it right here in the same environment. So I just linked my dev team library to my production library right here in the same environment. But you know, it's the same thing when you've got 2 different systems. Now, when I go to the production library, so here's the production library that's technically a subscriber. It's subscribed to the dev team library. And so notice the icon. The dev team library is published, and so it's got a blue arrow that points up. The production library is subscribed, so it's got a blue arrow that points down. Think of it as upload versus download. The dev team library uploads its files to other people. The subscribers download the files from whoever the publisher is. And so when I'm in that production library, I can come over here to related objects, and I can see the templates and other types of files that I've got. Now they're both going to be empty for right now, and there's two reasons for that. One is I just set it up and it hasn't had time to refresh. So I probably need to refresh my screen. The other thing is those files probably haven't finished uploading yet. They're uploading in the background, and if they haven't finished uploading, they're not going to show up here yet. We can't synchronize a file that hasn't completed the upload. All right. So I'm going to refresh my screen and just see if that's all it is, and yeah, it's still not done. So I'm going to have to wait for that upload to finish. And if I jump back over to my dev team library, I can see that the hybrid cloud manager is still showing as 0 bytes, so it's not done uploading. And then whenever it does finally manage to finish uploading, then it'll show up and we'll see it in the other library. Okay. So while I'm waiting on that, let's talk about something else that's important here. Permissions. When I created this library, right, I created the dev team library, we put some files into it. Oh, I just got a notification that one of the files finished uploading. So so that one's, oh, actually it's a system error. We've got unable to update files in the library. Course may be slow or not responding. All right, well, we'll wait on that. We can handle slow. All right, but when I set this up, you might have noticed that there wasn't really an option for permissions. When you go to Manage, you've got Settings, and you've got a password, and that's it. Well, what if I'm doing role-based authentication? And so I've got user roles defined. I've got administrators and help desk and all these other things with roles. I can't do that here. I just have a password. If you have the password, you get access. If you don't have the password, you don't get access, and that's it, right? So this is not as robust as we'd think. Well, it's not that it's not robust, it's just that it's not granular. I can't set permissions right here on the library itself. The libraries get their permissions from the global permissions. And I know it's a little bit weird. We're used to seeing the permissions right here on the system, but in this case, they are actually tucked away under the global stuff. So if I go to my home page, and I go down to Administration, and under Administration, we can go into the global permissions over here on the left. And under global permissions, this is where I can set my permissions. When you come in here and look at the global permissions that have been assigned, like to administrator or whoever, when you edit those, you'll see in the permissions over here, as we browse down that list of everything that's in here, we've got all privileges, and under there you've got like alarm labels and so on, that will actually find those content libraries tucked away in here. If we can find it in the list, they are buried in here somewhere. And oh, right there, content library. So you can find the content library, and if you expand that out, you'll see add library item, create local library, create subscribed library, delete local library, and so on. So if I want to set permissions as far as like who's able to access the library or download things from the library or even delete the library, I do it at the global level. And that means if I have 5 different libraries, it's going to be the same permissions across all 5, right? So I don't get granular control, but I do get control, and that can show up on the exam. That's why I wanted to mention that. So permissions can be kind of important. All right, the other thing is when I did that subscription, I told it, hey, don't download everything right now. Just download things when we need it, okay? Well, that doesn't mean that it doesn't download anything. What it does do is it downloads what's called the metadata. And the metadata is like a set of descriptions. It says, here's the file name and file size and file type of this file. It's everything but the data. And so when I set up that subscription, that's what I'm getting right now is the metadata. And the metadata is very small, and that happens very quickly. So we get that subscription, we get the data populated really quick. Then, anytime I go to use a file, it'll download it in the background. Or we can browse into the library, and you can right-click on a file and tell it to download it now. And it doesn't say download, it says synchronize. So you can say synchronize now. So we're synchronizing that file from the publisher down to the subscriber. So if there's 100 templates, and I know I'm going to use 5 of them, I'm not going to use them today, but I know I will use those 5, I can go ahead and synchronize the 5 right now. And that way when I do need them, they'll already be there for me. And then on those rare occasions when I need one of the other templates, I can just go to use it and it'll download at that time and pull it along. Or ISOs, executables, whatever other files it is that I have that I might need, those will come along when they're ready. All right, let's take a look and see if that has finished downloading for us. And so I'm just going to browse back into my dev team library and see if I've got some file sizes. That's the easiest way to tell if it's done, or to watch in your tasks. You'll see them uploading there too. So I still see I get 0 bytes on that one for my Power CLI, and I should have uploaded the Power CLI first since that's the smaller one. It's uploading the big one first, and then it'll do the smaller one. Well, you know what? I'm going to cancel the big OVF download. That way we can just do the small file. It'll already be loaded. Uploading a 2 gig file into a web browser is not necessarily the most fun thing to do in the world there, so it's just taking a long time. But the Power CLI is nice and small. That one will be ready for us. And so if I just refresh, and sure enough, yeah, if we take a look at it now, see my VMware Power CLI right here is showing as stored content locally. Yes, it is actually stored here. It's only 79 megs in size, and it's got my modified date and my sync date. So here it is. This is local content, right? I've got it right here in my dev team library. Now that's my publisher, right? That's the one that's publishing out to anybody who needs it, right? But if I go back up to my other data store, right? My production library. So if I go to content library and production library and I jump into it, well, it's actually not showing the Power CLI yet. Well, why not? Well, it has to refresh its file listing. It's got to reach out and get a copy of it. And that does happen periodically. If we wait long enough, it'll reach out and it'll update. If it doesn't, we can kick it off by right-clicking on the production library and going to synchronize library. So when I hit that, now it's going to reach out to whoever it's subscribed to and update its file list. And when it updates that file list, it's going to download it and populate it in here, and we'll be able to see, there we go. Just a quick refresh, and I can see that Power CLI. Okay, now notice the Power CLI is showing stored content locally. No, I got the metadata for the file. The file exists over in the dev team data store that's publishing it. I'm subscribed, so I see the file, but I don't actually have it available here. Now, the first time I go to use it, if somebody were to come along and click on it and try to export it, then it's going to download it at that time. And for a 100 meg file like this, that's not a big deal. But if this is a template that's a few gigs in size, I may not have that kind of patience. I might be in a hurry. I need this right away. And that's when we can cause it to synchronize and store it locally right now. So under the action menu, you'll see a few different options here, like synchronize item. Synchronize item says, go ahead and download it so that it's not just stored in production or in dev. Now it's also stored in production too. And so in the background, it's going to download that. And as soon as it completes, what we'll see change is instead of saying stored content locally, it'll say, or instead of saying no, it'll say yes, that it'll download that and it will be available. So we can download all the files right when we synchronize initially, or we can download files as we use them, or we can force them to synchronize manually like this eventually. There we go. A couple of refreshes later, and now I can see stored content locally, yes, and now it's stored right here too. All right, so this is a great way to share templates, OVFs, virtual applications. You can store ISOs, even executables, all in a content library and share it between vSphere deployments. It gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of just an easy way to share that data in between the two different environments.
All right, Don, does look like we're coming to the end of another episode, but before we sign off, do you have any additional words you'd like to throw in?
You know what, the only thing I didn't really cover was like name resolution. If you're going multi-site and the URL to subscribe is using a fully qualified domain name, obviously you'll need a DNS infrastructure in place to be able to resolve the name to an IP when you go and subscribe to the libraries. Otherwise, you can modify that URL to use an IP, but it kind of wreaks havoc with the certificates. It does expect a secure connection. So just make sure you got a good DNS infrastructure. This stuff will work out just fine for you.
All right, Don. Well, as always, we appreciate you being here in the studios, and we appreciate you, the viewer watching. Signing out for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Wes Bryan.
And I'm Don Pezet.
And we'll see you next time.